Yeah, they're not doing anything. Look, much like Donald Trump, they're hoping a solution comes. And they're hoping somebody comes, out of the sky, but it's not happening. And, I was just home actually filling up. It's $4.50 where I live in South Phoenix, which is a little more working class area. This is what I saw happening.
And to be clear, that's regular, not even premium.
That's regular.
Okay.
That's regular. Yes.
It makes a difference.
No, I never get the premium. I think that's a conspiracy. But beyond that, during the 2024 election, I saw the same thing that's happening right now. Mm-hmm. People were complaining about gas prices, home prices, and food prices. Mm-hmm. And what happened was the Democrats, we did not have a good message going to 2024, right? This is reminiscent of that, but even more so. They're not even trying to have a real conversation about what's happening in America. And they're pushing us into further, deeper into an unpopular war. And this is the person that ran on ending wars. Right? And on secondary portion of that, he also ran on exposing the pedophiles. And one of my good friends I served with in Iraq, who is a Republican, has voted for Donald Trump 3 times, still a friend of mine, told me very simply, I voted to stop wars and expose the pedophiles. Instead, I got someone who's starting wars and hiding the pedophiles. That is the sentiment of a lot of Trump-based voters, young white men, that he depends on to be part of his core base, and they are mad. And they're not going to come out and vote. I'm not saying they come out and vote for Democrats either, but they're not going to come out and vote. Plus, a lot of people that are just angry again that for the last 3 years, their economic situation has only slid further and further, and they don't see it turning around, and they see a president that does not care about them. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite. He's making a lot of money while being in office, while they themselves are hurting right now.
Senator, I think you more so than most know what war is. You served in Iraq. You were a Marine, combat operations. You saw friends die. I've heard you talk about it. You said recently, quote, I don't want to win this war, just about Iran, to be clear, because the way you win this war is going to cost tens of thousands of men's lives. You see the president, he's so flippant about this. Mm-hmm. We have to attack Iran because they have a nuclear weapon. And we've now lost 18 service members, depending on how you count, however the Pentagon wants to count. We don't know how many have been wounded over there. How worried are you that this could turn into some ground escalation for Donald Trump to save face and save his ego at some point?
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, he's not a very bright man to begin with. And he's surrounded himself with people that have political agendas, and countries also have their own agendas, whether it's Israel, whether it's Saudi Arabia, UAE, all these other countries. And they could push him into an escalation in the theory that that'll get us out of this. The problem is the deeper you get, the more expensive it gets. And when I say not just money, when I mean blood, right? When you start sending men into combat, men and women to combat, bad things happen. It doesn't matter even if you have the most sophisticated military in the world. When people go against people in some very small, contained areas with the capabilities of the drone capability now that Iran has, we could start losing men very quickly. And then the worst problem with that is he's such an ego-based man that he would try to double down on it. It's like, well, now I have to send more troops and more troops. We find ourselves essentially circling the drain into a never-ending war, like we did for Iraq and Afghanistan. So that's very, very dangerous. The thing that he needs to do is actually work hard to figure out how to get us out of this, right? In the best national interest of this country, and that requires real diplomacy, requires real negotiations. You can't send Dumb and Dumber over there. Witkoff and his, son-in-law aren't going to do it.
Bush.
Yeah, I mean, you got 2 guys that make their living flipping dirt. Versus a country that's used to skilled negotiation. The guy that actually is negotiating for Iran wrote the book on negotiations, right?
So then what is the end game then? Because the costs are showing up here at home, and I don't see an offer. Like, no one has actually been able to effectively articulate to me how this ends without America on their knees.
From the administration.
No, in general. How does the war end? If we don't, without America capitulating, how does the war end?
Well, 2 things you got to remember. Number 1, this is why when you go to war, you understand why you're going to war, and you actually understand what the exit is. This is what happened right here. This president was hoping, and his advisor hoping, this was just going to be like Venezuela, right? That's not how you conduct yourself. That was a very responsible action, and the fact that there are still people in his administration that have not been fired should scare the heck out of us, because that means they're probably going to trip us into another war. Number 2, at the end of the day, the best thing we could do is make sure that we open up the Strait of Hormuz, that both sides just go back to, at least having some level of detente, and then we go into long-term negotiations to, hopefully rein in any type of nuclear ambition that Iran has. That has to take a long term. There's going to have to be, both sides are going to have to eat it at one point or other if you want to have a technical term of negotiations. Yeah. But it's going to require both Iran and the United States to understand that they both actually can't sustain a long-term fight, nor do they want to get into a long-term fight. But it also requires the president to actually be a leader and not just be led by the nose by some of his advisors and some of these other countries that want to see a never-ending conflict in Iran.
Are you running for president?
I'm going to answer this.
It was a good answer.
I'm going to answer this right now, right here. No, ma'am, I'm not going to answer that right now. But, this does concern me. I think
for him is an indicator of how weakened he is with only 99 days before the election.
99, as you know, special number to many of us. I want to put up more of this Fox polling, Jason, because you really see where the preferences fall. And this is not the automatic for the Democrats. They had struggled in 24 to get out their message on some of these issues. So when you see the trust going towards the Dems, or perhaps you can tell us if you think it's also a rejection of Trump, but inequality, 20-plus edge, healthcare, inflation, a 10 edge, the economy, if you just say it writ large, it starts to shrink a little bit. Trump has had people who think that he's a businessman on that. Foreign policy, if you ask it that way, it kind of doesn't bring up the war, +7. And then you get to the areas where security and crime, Trump is holding, but holding an edge that's far less than he used to have. What do you see in these current numbers from Fox?
What I see is Donald Trump's inability to continue communicating with voters. Remember, we've talked about this already for several months. To continue with the metaphor, whenever Trump is asked about the economy, whenever he's talked about gas prices or inflation, he's basically saying, hey, if you're having gas problems, I feel bad for you, son, because he doesn't really care. You look at what happened this weekend after giving a speech where, again, he doesn't get a lot of laughs. The White House correspondence doesn't get a tremendous amount of attention. What is he doing today? He's posting Rick and Morty memes on his social media, right? This is someone who has lost their ability to deliver messages to voters. And when that happens, people are just going to vote and they're going to do polls based on their lived experience. And their lived experience is completely separate from what they're hearing from the Republican Party. And Donald Trump can no longer control the narrative.
Rick and Morty, a great cartoon. But in the world of that cartoon, as well as its creator, Dan Harmon, is pretty critical of Trump, greed, right-wing excess. I mean, it's not a political cartoon in its frame, but it's just funny. He's not exactly reaching for a Kid Rock meme. It's the problem he's had with a lot of other creatives and artists where he tries to say, oh, maybe I'm cool like them, and I want to be in that conversation, just like with FIFA and soccer. And then he's tempting them to punch back. We'll watch for that. But it brings me to the next thing I wanted to show you, which is Larry Kudlow is a longtime economic politico. He worked for Trump. Talking about the charisma or riz, as they say, that's lacking. Here's what he observes.
Call it swag, swagger, riz, aura, or just plain messaging, but the GOP doesn't have it. You're bungling everything. Nothing is getting done. Your messaging is non-existent. You've lost your swag, your swagger, your riz, or whatever the young people say. No one knows what the heck you're doing, sir. They have no idea.
Jason?
And that's Larry Kudlow. And here's the thing, Ari. I went in preparation for tonight. I went back and actually looked at the Republican Party platform from 2024. Right there in the first opening section, it talks about how wars are a bad idea. Trump was going to end unnecessary wars because wars lead to inflation. In their own words, the Republicans are not following their own party platform.
As we come on the air to start the week, we are exactly 99 days away from the election. You might say Donald Trump has 99 problems, and the midterms are one of them. And that's even according to his own advisors and allies. I'm going to show you some of the new numbers, including a special look at why both parties agree on one thing. If the elections were held tonight, Democrats would be in the lead position to retake power. So on the one hand, 99 days is still an eternity in politics. But on the other hand, both parties, their candidates, even some Trump advisors, are absorbing that reality and reacting. Now, we begin, though, with the related fact that Donald Trump continues to bleed support from his own base. This is different, I'll just tell you, from the midterm projections, because that has to do with who will actually turn out and what else will happen. And we're going to get to that with some very special guests tonight. But our lead story is the toxic combination of Donald Trump's ongoing governing problems. The high prices he hasn't stemmed, an Epstein scandal that won't go away even with Republicans controlling subpoena power, and now a war that continues long after Donald Trump said it would be done. Here's the new polling. Majorities disapprove of Trump's handling of many top issues, 65% on this economy, a higher 71% when you ask just about the high prices and inflation that he has not only failed to stem, but the war has, of course, noticeably exacerbated. And then the war itself, that is the policy, not just how it's affecting your gas prices and pocketbook, another 63% disapproving there. MS Now has reporting with sources saying that Trump's own advisors have basically conceded that things are so bad they must, or at least are, allowing Republican candidates to distance themselves from Trump. An operative saying you're not going to have candidates running out to defend the president's handling of the economy or the war. Republican insiders nervous about what some call a downright scary enthusiasm gap, with conservatives just not excited to turn out for Donald Trump. That's Washington Post reporting. The apathy reaching deep into the Republicans' base, spreading to the party's, quote, most consistent voters. Now, this is a real thing. If you've been watching our coverage here in the summer, which is a time period where sometimes people understandably take a break from politics or news or look away, I have shared a point that was as true last week as is true this week as we start a new political week. There are certain things that Donald Trump can spin. Lord knows that he has had success telling his voters and his base all sorts of spin, myths, sometimes.
Something is happening inside the Republican Party that Donald Trump never expected. States that were supposed to be safe are suddenly becoming competitive, and Republicans are starting to panic. New polling shows Democrats gaining ground in multiple Senate races, forcing the GOP to spend time and money defending seats they once considered untouchable. Why? Because many voters say they're still struggling with high prices, rising gas costs, and an economy that hasn't improved the way they were promised. Even some longtime Trump supporters are expressing frustration, saying the focus has shifted away from everyday problems. Republican strategists are reportedly worried about enthusiasm, with concerns that some conservative voters may simply stay home instead of turning out. And that's a serious problem in close elections. If Republicans are being forced to defend multiple red states at the same time, it doesn't just threaten one or two Senate seats.